Chapter 46. No further explanation was needed. I shouted at my grandfather and stretched out my two hands. Okay, wait for a second. Wait a minute, Grandpa. Huh? Leaving my grandfather tilting his head, I hurried back to my room. Dad, bag. Huh? Yeah. My father, who was standing blankly, was also busy because of me. I found a square leather bag in the corner of the room and spread it on the bed. Then I throw the things I think Paris will need and use into the bag. This book and that one too, and cookies, candy, writing tools. For a while, I ran around the room and the house packing my things. It didn't seem like much, but the bag immediately filled up. What are you doing, Florentia? My grandfather, who was waiting in the parlor, finally came into my room and asked. I packed some of the things I needed. It won't take long, so wait a minute, Grandpa. Suddenly, there was a small garden on the bed. You need them right now? Grandfather tilted his head because he couldn't understand. I looked back at Grandfather and answered, To bring to Perez. You give it to him? For some reason, my grandfather's eyes wriggled. Are you doing that because you don't use it anymore? I didn't bring much, but I didn't think that my grandfather's frown would open. When we meet Perez, Grandpa will understand my heart too. If you see that thin child, you will probably want to feed and take care of anything. I am telling the truth. Okay, let's go. My grandfather's voice was a little weird, but I shrugged once. Then I take the leather bag and lifted it with one hand. No, I tried to lift it. Wow, the bag is quite heavy, so my body's swaying. I have a lot of stuff. My father sighed a little next to me and tried to pick up my bag, but I shook my head a little and said in a voice as lively as my grandfather, Now I'm ready to see Perez, Grandpa. Asterisk. I wrapped my bags around happily. Then after a while, we left the mansion. No matter how much you want to see him, are you trying to go to the Imperial Palace in pajamas? My grandfather shook his head and said as if it was absurd. No, it's because I got up while I was sleeping and I'm so busy. Oh, it's embarrassing. I shouted to go to the Imperial Palace while wearing a nightgown with lace. If I had found out, I would have laughed a little less confidently. I looked out the window, pretending to be calm and casual. It was still before the sun came up, so the sky and the road where the carriage was running still dark. Our group was very simple to say that the Lombardy Lord was moving. It was all about the carriage and the Knights of Lombardy who followed. It is all silent except for the sound of a horseshoe and the sound of carriage wheels rolling in the road. I looked back at my grandfather sitting next to me. Perhaps because of the faint light in the carriage, the wrinkles of the eyebrows looked deep today. When he talked about Paris last night, he seemed to have a lot of thoughts. Let's come and talk together before the morning sun rises. So what has changed his mind? I couldn't ask my grandfather directly, but I could feel vaguely from the deep wrinkles indicates that the reason wasn't good. The carriage ran without stopping when we go out of the Lombardy territory, and when we ran through the fields and past the gate. The soldiers from a distance saw the carriage approach quickly, which only the Lord of Lombardy could do. The enormous castle gate, which would have been firmly closed until dawn, but the curfew was released, and gave away to easily in front of the Lombardy pattern. The wagon we boarded didn't even need to slow down, and finally we reached the front of the Imperial Palace. I was a little nervous. There was also a case last time because the Imperial Palace is still in the Imperial Palace anyway. When the wagon slowed down, I changed my posture and sat down, thinking that someone might open the wagon door right away. However, grandfather's posture of looking out the window with his bird on his chin remains unchanged. Then he turned his head to see my sudden gaze, and our eyes met. And at that moment, the carriage started moving again like a lie. Even the owner of the castle was not yet awakened from sleep. We walked straight from the front gate of the Imperial Palace. Grandfather looked at me a little surprised and said, reaching out and stroking my head, Did you think we would be checked like last time? I know it'll be okay because I was with Grandpa, but it's still Imperial Palace. Lombardy's lord knows that he can walk into the Emperor's office if he wishes, without anyone's restraint. However, it is a separate story from what I know in my head. Grandpa patted my head and said soothingly, You are Lombardy. Lombardy is not afraid of the imperial family. Wow, cool. My grandfather muttered softly as he stared at the cuteness that made him laugh. Tricky things, don't worry about your grandfather, child. Your grandfather is going to be very angry today. I don't know exactly who you're punishing, but I nodded vigorously. In the meantime, the carriage entered the Imperial Palace. Like in the rest of the world, it was a quiet place, except for the sparse lights along the way. Where should we go? The coachman opened the small window and asked. I only know how to walk from here. Then it can't be helped. My grandfather, who seemed embarrassed for a moment, opened the door of the carriage and got off. I also jumped down while holding my grandfather's hand. The coachman said he would follow us with my luggage, but grandfather shook his head and carried my bag in his hand. It must have been a judgment that he couldn't show Perez to anyone. Let's go, Florentia. Grandpa reached out to me. Unlike my father's hand, I walked on a path in the invisible forest, holding a slightly more crude and warmer hand. Fortunately, the eastern sky was gradually brightening. Relying on my memory, I arrived at the place where Perez was plucking and eating herbs, and I realized I only know its way west. I don't really know where Perez lives. Grandpa, that's it. Why? Because I saw Perez here last time, and I couldn't hear anything outside that he lives in the woods west of the Empress Palace. Contrary to my expectation that it would be in trouble, my grandfather seemed to have a point somewhere. Is it there? My grandfather muttered an unknown word and looked at a faraway place where only dense trees could be seen. Um, it's nastier than I thought, my grandfather's grasp of my hand. From here on, grandfather knows the way, so let's go. My grandfather walked first with a hardened face, and after a while we stood in front of a small palace. It was an old building that looked close to ruins because it was not managed. When the wind blew even a little, the sound of the window beeping rang out. You must be crazy. The curse came out without my knowledge. No matter how it is, she leaving a child alone in an abandoned house like this? The storehouse of the Empress is more comfortable than this, my grandfather said while looking at the palace with a serious eye like me. One of the concubines of the late emperors live here. Grandpa couldn't speak all the words he has and shortened his words, but he seemed to know everything. The Empress which made Paris and Paris' mother live in such a place. Maybe nobody will be here. Even so, this is too. Did you say that he was in the west of the Empress Palace? There is only this one palace in the western forest, and this is the place where the second prince lived with his mother. Well, then really. Honestly, the building looks like it wouldn't be strange even if a ghost pops out right away. Living here alone for years, I wouldn't be able to withstand one day. Don't think about a year. I realized again how viciously Paris survived. Let's go inside. I was just about to go inside at the words of my grandfather. Bang! There was a loud sound, and the door opened with full force as if it were falling apart. And the little boy who pushed the door came out toward me. His black hair fluttered every single step. He jumped on the floor, and his white skin shone like clean porcelain, even in the twilight of the dawn. Perez! Ow! Perez, who arrived in front of me in no time, immediately hugged me. The body hitting me with a humming sound was painful, but I couldn't push him away. The hand of a guy leaning his head on my shoulder and holding me tightly was so desperate. Florentia. The voice of the thin guy calling me is trembling. Hey, let go of this. I can't breathe, I said deliberately in a deep voice. Then the guy who seemed not to let go of no matter what happened gently withdrew from my words. But it was just half a step. He only stepped back and stared at me, with his right hand still gripping the sleeve of my clothes. It was still an expressionless face, but his red eyes were only looking at me. Why is he doing this? Well, since he was alone in a place like this, it would be nice to see anyone. I said, I will come again. Why are you so fussed? Because I thought you forgot me. My conscience was a bit stabbed, and I said with a nostril, did I look like I couldn't keep my promises? Bong bong. Instead of answering, Paris shook his head vigorously. It was then. A large hand approaching grabbed the back of Paris and put him down. Stay away from my granddaughter. It was my grandfather looking down at Paris unfavorably. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47. Are you okay, Tia? My grandfather asked, brushing off my clothes that Paris was holding. I'm fine, Grandpa. This kid here is my friend. Paris Brevaccia Dorelli. Paris' shoulder flinched a little. However, the cold-hearted grandfather's gaze only looked at him and down, up and down, as if evaluating an object. Grandpa, it was my first time seeing such a figure, so I carefully called my grandfather. Yes, this kid is the second prince. You can tell even when you meet him while walking outside the palace. Why? The grandfather replied without taking his frown from Paris. You guy, you resemble the late emperor very much. I think you are not Jovin's, but the late emperor's child. Paris' eyes shook at the words. Did no one tell you? When Grandpa asked, he nodded a little. Hey, your mother would have seen the late emperor, and Jovin's wouldn't have wanted to remember his father. The emperor's majesty wasn't good with the late emperor majesty, Grandpa. I don't know, Grandpa said with a big smile. I'm still not sure Jovin's didn't poison his father. It's a whole trash family. I thought Lombardy was a mess, but the imperial family too. At least Vise waited quietly for his father to die in old age. When I was still silent, my grandfather looked at me and quickly spoke. Of course, it's not something Artia cares about. Forget what grandfather said. Yes, Grandpa, I replied quickly like a good granddaughter who listens well. Yes, and you? Grandpa's gaze turned back to Paris. It was better than before, but it was still somewhere cold. Are you living alone in this separate palace now? Nod. No maid or nanny? Nod. Seeing that you haven't starved to death yet, what you eat is something someone sometimes brings. Nod. Is it possible for the emperor's son to be dumb without speaking? Someone should know how to answer in proper words. Grandpa screamed. Then Perez, with his shoulders shrugged, hid behind my back. That guy, Grandpa, also reached out to grab Perez's back as if he didn't like it, but for some reason, my grandfather stopped. I jumped in the gap and laughed while I grabbed grandfather's hand. Grandpa, go inside and talk. My leg hurts. In fact, it wasn't my legs that would hurt just because I was standing this far, but I trembled. Yes, Florentia, you will be in first. How about you, Grandpa? Grandfather talks a little with this guy and then goes in. Grandpa's expression was determined. If I insisted on staying here, I felt like he would pick up Perez again and put him in the wagon. First of all, now is the time to listen to my grandfather. I have no choice but to turn my back and head to the separate palace. My grandfather said to Perez, who still looked at me, She is your saviors who have carried me so hard. Look pretty well. Sweet. Florentia enters the palace, and the old door is closed. Lulak looked down at the second prince in front of him. Deliberately did not hide the sharp and heavy momentum. When Lulak was like this, even a healthy adult couldn't raise his head easily. But Perez was different. His bright red eyes were looking straight up at Lulak. Like a white porcelain mask, the face without change was filled with sharp alertness. It was completely different from when Florentia was next to him. A little while ago, when Lulak reached out his hand, he even put it in his eyes for a while. That's pretty good. Hearing the voice of his granddaughter and seeing him rushing out and listening to her words, Lulak thought he was a petty puppy that lost his mother. Now Lulak sees him as a very clever bum. Lulak laughed. I thought that only the appearance resembles the late emperor, but your personality is also very good. The young Paris was evaluating Lulak, seeing the appearance of a forgotten prince with a poor body who would stop breathing just by reaching out and twisting his neck. A lonely person who won't cry even if he dies. Such appearance is very sharp like the spearhead. Even though the late emperor was a human who failed to protect his family, as an emperor who ruled the empire, he succeeded in doing his job. And ironically, that's what made Lulak's anger subside a little. Lulak wanted to pretend he didn't know and just let him die, but couldn't. Do you want to live? Lulak asked Perez. If I say a word, I want. What should I do? Would you like to save me? Perez was clenching his small fist. Bloody gaze was gleaming toward Lulak, who mocked with his life. Red eyes, it was called Ruby, which came in as a gift by accident. At the moment, Lulak imagined how Ravini and Janus gnawed her teeth while looking at Perez, and he felt better. In fact, that alone was enough reason for Perez to remain alive. Yes, I decided I will save you. Lulak smiled while rubbing his beard. You're lucky that your presence makes the Empress very unbearable. Perez was not happy. Rather, he spoke in a voice full of hostility. Florentia doesn't resemble you at all. What? Ha ha ha. Lulak broke his back and burst into a big laughter. Yeah, that's very fortunate, isn't it? My granddaughter doesn't look like me, so there's not a single dirt on it. Then the smile disappeared from Lulak's face in an instant and warned him. So don't think of sticking to my granddaughter. You're not the one for her. Do you understand? Lulak remembered Perez's eyes while looking at Florentia. It was just a child's pure friendship. It was a kind of fire that if a little time passed and they grow up, it would quickly ripen and set fire. Although Perez was a descendant of the emperor, he was not that important. For Lombardy, being a member of the imperial family was rather a factor of deduction. Perez didn't answer, but Lulak didn't need an answer either. As of today, from now on, Perez's desire to live is as big as Lulak's possession. If you try to get too close to my granddaughter, you might not know whether you were a dog or a criminal. I could pull the collar in you. Lastly, Lulak, who looked at Perez, turned to find his granddaughter. Where are you, Florentia? Opening the door of the separate palace and shouting out loud, the pleasant voice seemed like a completely different person. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. While Perez and my grandfather were having a conversation, I was looking around inside the palace. Like a building inside the imperial palace, it was large and spacious, but the unmanaged palace was empty. I carefully stepped on the stone steps up to the second floor. It was broken here and there, so I had to be careful with my steps. Of course, no one would have been able to light the lights in time, so I can only see the only room with the door open on the other side of the dark corridor. Wow, really? When I opened the door to the bedroom, I lost something to say. My prediction that I thought it would be messy and dirty because a child lived alone without the care of an adult was completely wrong. I wouldn't have been surprised if it had been. Perez's bedroom was empty. It was all about a large bed, simple furniture, and stacked books. Except for the old utensils placed in front of the fireplace, there was no trace of people living in this room. There weren't any of those common ornaments or anything that looked valuable. There was no way that the treasures of the palace that a child lives alone without an owner will remain. Except for the two things I found while sitting on the bed. It was a wooden sword on the side of his bed and the bottle of medicine I gave. The two items were placed in a circle on top of the blanket. At that time, I heard my grandfather's voice. Where are you, Florentia? I'm here. I quickly ran down the stairs. Fortunately, Perez looked fine with no wounds. Then it is. My grandfather isn't bad enough to get angry with a poor kid like that. When I jumped and stood in front of him, my grandfather bent his back slightly, keeping eye level, and said, Grandfather has a place to go for a moment, so wait here. I'll leave one night outside, so don't worry. A knight with a slightly similar face held the bag I had brought in his hand and bowed. Yes, Grandpa. Haha, kids. Grandpa finally stroked my head and went outside. Lombardy's courage, who was waiting, picked up Grandfather and started running along the forest path. I waved my hand and asked Perez, who was standing next to me, What did you talk with my grandfather? Nothing. You've been out for quite a while. What did you talk about? I didn't say anything. So did you get scolded by my grandfather? Well, it wouldn't have been much. As I closed my curiosity, I reached out a hand to Perez. He looked at me meaningfully. Let's go, because I brought this and that to give you. The way up the stairs is quite difficult. If this skinny guy fell by mistake, he might get seriously injured. In that sense, I stretched out my hand. Perez, who blinked slowly once, held my hand perhaps because he was slow in everything. I started to climb the stairs first, holding the hand that was gently grabbing me tightly. I wondered if he didn't like holding hands with me, but fortunately, he was quietly following my step by step. And when I got to the bedroom, Perez was holding my hand tighter. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Jovanes walked through the halls of the imperial palace with a stiff face. It was a step full of impatience. When he arrived at the office, the servant standing in front of him quickly opened the door. The sky, tinged with the red sun, was just rising, and the sunlight shone deeply into the office through the open window. And there was a man who received the light intact and greeted Jovains. "It's been a long time, Your Majesty." It was Lulak Lombardi sitting and drinking tea as if it were his own office. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48. "What are you doing here?" He endured the frowning of his eyebrows, but a trembling voice came out. Emperor Jovains hurriedly coughed and corrected his words. "I mean, why did you come to this place?" Just like that, Lulak said with a smile, making wrinkles around his eyes. "It's been 3 years. The Lord of Lombardy never left Lombardy's territory. That was a good thing for Jovains, but that's also annoying. The old man knows all the stories of the imperial palace, but the emperor himself just knows a little what's going on inside Lombardy. That's it." Jovains returned to his composure and responded, naturally sitting at the seat. "You've been a lot desperate, but it's also for a while." Lulak's words, Jovains' thick eyebrows wriggled once. It was incredible that he treated the emperor as if he had met a town child after a long time. "How many times did this old man want to come to the imperial palace?" "The last time I met you, I remembered the words of His Majesty and turned around in front of the imperial palace gate." "What are you heard?" "I think I already consider the Lord of Lombardy to be my uncle. I have no confidence to lead this empire from the imperial palace so Lombardy can in and out as if it was your house. If you want to get me out of the throne, keep your face on the meeting." Jovains had nothing to say. It was a natural reaction because it was actually what Jovains said to Lulak. At that time, I was struggling with hard work. Lulak who smiled and looked at Jovains, who was making a demeaning excuse, said, "Even though I had endured so much, today I couldn't help but see Your Majesty. Please forgive me." "What the hell is going on from this dawn?" Jovains was also curious and couldn't stand it. To come to the room and wait like this without giving a word in advance wasn't like Lulak. "It's a surprise, but do you know what's going on with second Prince Perez?" Perez? It was an unfamiliar name to call. It took a few seconds to realize that it was the name of his son who had soon forgotten. If it were that child, the Empress would be taking good care of it. "Are you saying that the reason you came today is because of that child?" Unexpectedly, Jovains tilted his head. "I would like to ask Your Majesty one thing. Did you really believe that the Empress will properly take care of the second prince and you entrusted her to take care of Perez?" Lulak honors the Emperor, but not with the Empress. It was their distinctive way of saying that the Lombardy states were unrivaled. Jovains responded whimsically to Lulak's speech, which seemed to be punishing him. "Are you trying to interfere with the affairs of the imperial family now?" Unlike the late emperor, Jovains was a relatively quiet emperor who had never been openly hostile to Lombardy. But he was quite wriggling when it comes to the heirs. "I'm not saying to Your Majesty about the responsibility for your children. What's the use of such a thing to the imperial family?" But Lulak shook his head sadly. "The seed sown by Your Majesty is not an excuse for Your Majesty's pleasure." "You're kidding me." Jovains' attitude has become quite serious. "What do you mean now? Explain correctly." To Jovains, who is impatient, Lulak smiled leisurely and said, but the words flowing out of his mouth weren't light at all. Angenes reported this year's estate revenue cut in half by half. Half? The fact that Angenes, the Empress family, was taking tax evasion to some extent was not new to Jovains either. However, the fact that it was half was embarrassed him. "But there's something else that Your Majesty should pay more attention to." "What is it?" The person who found something strange in the tax statement reported it, but strangely no action. It was, as Lulak said. The expression disappeared from the Emperor's startled face. Lulak poured oil, regardless of the Emperor's reaction. "Isn't it true that quite a few people are working for Angenes with the money of the imperial family?" It was also poured out. "Isn't paying taxes important? You can see it as an easy thing and close your eyes once, even when the officials of the imperial family are cooperating in the matter. Isn't it obviously a scratch on His Majesty's circle?" Well, the Emperor rubbed his forehead as if he was having a headache. Watching it as if it very enjoyable play, Lulak threw the second stone he brought, this time hoping for a bigger ripple in the lake. "I apologize to Your Majesty. Do you remember the mine located on the offshore of the Service River?" "I remember. The iron mine that the late emperor left to Lombardy in case of emergency was sold to Baraport family by my son." "Baraport? They are one of the best family members of Angenes. In case the Relly family was deposed from the throne, they put their assets little by little and left them secretly to Lombardy. For example, 5,000 gold bars sleeping in the deepest part of Lombardy bank vault. Or externally, it is known as a small and invisible mine, but in fact, a mine with iron was an example. It was a long-standing pledge that the Relly and Lombardy do not turn their backs against each other. Although the documents have Baraport seal stamped on it, it is very clear who the real mine owner is. Of course, it was Scott's family who took the mining business, but Lulak didn't dare to comment on that. Angenes may not have known what kind of mine it was, but the cave has grown enough to reach out to iron ore. Iron ore was a very important military resource. Iron, which is the material of weapons, was a resource possessed by very few families, including the imperial family and Lombardy. And it goes without saying that they were only families who had been loyal to the imperial family for a long time. Although Angenes were the emperor's family, they were originally more aristocratic than the imperial family. Iron ore was not a property allowed to them, and it is His Majesty that made them able to dream presumptuous dreams. It's my fault. That doesn't make sense. I just don't you give Anjana strength? You didn't even care about your first son and threw the second son to the Empress. Rabini Angenes didn't even care about killing or saving the maid's child, whether she left him or killed him. Jovanes was not a stupid emperor. First of all, it was in Lulak's evaluation. He was bright and quick to read the lines of people and words, just like now. Then, are you saying that the Empress hurt Perez, the second prince? Fortunately, he was still alive. I think he had eaten the poison. Ha! Jovanes lost his words and burst into laughter. The affection for the son of a maid that he couldn't even remember his name was definitely zero. Rather, it was caused by the resentment and anger toward the empress, who dared to touch his veins. Lulak said, while pushing the glass of water in front of the emperor. Of course, it was a very good number to empower Angenes with words to fight against me. Your Majesty. Jovins, who read the meaning, flinched, but Lulak smiled happily when he saw it. It was close to the look of the teacher's well-bred disciple. You gave me too much. That was the problem. I don't even know my ship is going to burst, and I'm still greedy. Now it's time to take the power. However, Your Majesty doesn't have to do anything. Jovan's hand, that pressing hard on his greasy forehead, stopped. Lulak laughed at the emperor, and he made an offer that the emperor would never refuse. I will be the villain. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I and Perez sat face to face on the bed. The one sofa was piled up with dust, and the floor was like a cold bone, so it was an unavoidable choice. The black hair still covering the nape, the white skin, and the eyes as red as the lips looked at me. Perez, you. His long eyelashes trembled a little in one blink. Are you a little taller? I think. Perez replied, nodding his head with a grim face. Because your head was bigger than others. I muttered, recalling the appearance of the guy in my previous life. Standing in a crowd, gathering crowded with words, that the new prince was delivered. That was all I saw once from the distance. The figure of Paris, who looked down at everything with his cold eyes, swinging his cloak with a more angular body than the knights around him, captivated the crowd at once. Who? Huh? Oh no, but it's hard to imagine that the guy in front of me is growing up as much as an adult. Compared to Prince Perez, who was like a big wolf with black fur and gloss, this guy is. Who are you thinking about now? They are equally expressionless, but now Perez is a little more poppy. He tilts his head at my unexpected words. Look at that, like a real dog. No, it's like a puppy. Do you have any puppy you have? No, I'm going to raise one now. Do you like a puppy? I like it too. I haven't seen it, but I'll definitely like it because you like it. It was Perez, muttering words of unknown meaning. Did you do well with the homework I gave you? Eat food, take medicine when the maid comes to lie down, and practice swordsmanship. He replied right away, sticking his fingers one by one. Okay, I did it, as you tell me, everything. Is it my imagination that the dark tail flutters behind his bright face? Shall I show you? Perez asked, like wanted to grab a wooden sword and swing it right now. No, that's not important now. You have to get a prize because you did your homework well, isn't it? Prize? While I took my bag, I laughed. I don't know that Perez's gaze will follow my hand while I untie the knot on the lid of the bag that is tied. Now I will give a prize to a good child. Am I a Santa? I said while I opened my bag. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49. The first thing I took out of the gift bag was a thick autumn and winter cloak. It had a similar design to the black cloak worn by adult Perez. Once I roughly brushed off the dust, I wrapped it around Perez's neck. He moved his red eyes and watched the thick cloak clung to his shoulders. Well, it sits you well. So there was a reason why he wore only that. I thought it was a school uniform. Perez's black hair and flawless skin stood out more than her cloak with colorful patterns. Don't go cold and dress well. I watched Perez wearing the cloak that I gave and took out a second gift. It was a wooden sword. Oh, it's heavy. My both arms are overwhelming by it. I know you already have a wooden sword, but the last time I saw it, it seemed too light for you, so I brought it. In fact, it is more accurate to say that the twins have thrown it away. Perez doesn't need to know the details. Look at it once. At my words, Perez held the wooden sword in one hand and swung it briefly. Whoop! The sound of cutting through the wind was different because there was a very heavy and thick iron core embedded in the wooden sword. Ah, the eyes of the indifferent guy turned around. How do you like it? Then take this as well. What I took out of my bag was a swordsmanship book. Perez, who received a book covered in tough leather, read aloud the title on the cover. Brown Swordsmanship? Right, it's not Imperial Swordsmanship Book, but Brown Swordsmanship Book. Perez doesn't know the difference between the two. This is why it is not worth living a luxury product. I eventually had to explain it myself. It's actually similar to Imperial Swordsmanship. What was once called Brown Swordsmanship is now generally called Imperial Swordsmanship. But doesn't this look a little old? Yes, it is. Then what does it mean? Is this really a book with brown swordsmanship written on it? Yeah, that's right. Even the former Brown Lord directly revised and reorganized this. It was unexpected luck that this book came into my hands. I immediately thought of Paris when I found it stuck in a room corner my grandfather had made for me. This original brown swordsmanship is the perfect gift for him. Unlike me, who was so excited, he still looked down at the book in his hand again with a calm face. However, I could see he stroked the cover of the book with his finger. By the way, it may be a little disappointing, but it's not yours. Then, for now, you can read the book as you wish, but someone might ask for it later. Then you have to give it. Nope. What? No matter what I said or did. He nodded and said, okay, but this is the first time he didn't. I was a little embarrassed and asked again. Paris looked at my surprised face for a moment with eyes slightly covered with black bangs, then replied with his gaze lowered. Okay, I'll give it. What was that? I was surprised. But well, it means that you liked the book that much. I added words to comfort him. I'll find a better one later. Don't be too sad. Are you listening to me or not? Perez's little finger squeezed the corner of the book. Somehow my conscience is stubbed. It seems like I became a bad adult who gave a toy to a child and took it away. Okay, will you give me a better book later? But I didn't have an answer. I just nodded my head. He is easily spoiled by something like this. When I recalled the future of Perez, who was blowing so fast that a single needle could not fit in, I felt a cute feeling because I was still young. This is all for you, the prince of the future. I searched inside my bag, thinking of trying to understand his deep heart. Somehow, I need something to relieve Perez's anger. Okay, here. What I popped out was a bottle full of candy, like the one I gave with the Malcolm medicine last time. The appearance of colored round candy in a transparent glass bottle was a good one to see. Oh, this sweet. Perez's interest, who has embraced the book as if he didn't want it to be taken away, finally moved to something else. After all, a child is a child. I deliberately shook the bottle to make a sound and handed it over Perez's hand. Do you like sweets? It's not the original, but I like this. Then, would you like something sweeter and more delicious? Anything sweeter and more delicious? I managed to get Perez's attention, then pulled the small box out of my bag. Always on the table in my study room and my living room. It's a chocolate cookie. Chocolate? Perez looked at the black thing stuck in a savory cookie. Have you ever eaten this? I already knew from Hysteria that chocolate is not a common food yet. I picked up a chocolate cookie the size of my palm and gave it to Perez. Try it. The guy who hesitated for a while at my words begged the chocolate cookie. It's delicious, right? Look at this. I brought this much to you to eat. It's chocolate that others haven't even seen in a lifetime, but in my house, it was like a tissue stuck in every space. I collected and brought all the things in my room, living room, and so on, so there would be more than 30 snacks. I should eat one too. Oh, I'm hungry. After holding one more to Perez's other hand, I bite a little of a cookie. The sticky yet crazy sweet taste spreads in my mouth, so I think I'll eat a little more. I can't eat breakfast and move from dawn. Ahem, I'm sleepy. Honestly, I don't really know what the cookie tastes other than sweet. I roughly pushed it into my mouth and slumped on my side. Perez, who had finished one and was about to eat the other, looked at me. I don't mind it. I need to sleep. I feel tired and sleepy, and I fall asleep. I looked at Perez eating a cookie while lifting my increasingly heavier eyelids a few times. I can see a piece of chocolate in his mouth. I wanted to tell him to wipe it, but I was falling asleep without even knowing. He was like a rabbit when he started staring his red eyes at me lying down and yawned my mouth. It was funny that such a cute kid would later become such a cold prince. However, it was a good thing that he didn't have to suffer anymore. I thought while looking at the red eyes that were still staring at me. Still, I've done this much, but will he pretend not to know it completely later? At least, when I try to become the Lord of Lombardy after he becoming a prince, he will not be a hindrance, right? Yes, that's it. That's when the time to close my eyes becomes longer than the time I open my eyes. I could see Paris slumping across from me. You are also tired. Well, the sun has just risen. It's too early for a child to get up and move. Sleep a little and wake up. The last thing I saw before I fell asleep was Paris, white face, looking at me with a cookie buried in his mouth. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What should I do? I asked the voice softly. Both of you are sleeping so well. Then the other responded in a similar voice. Once you guys go downstairs and grab your majesty's goods. At the quiet command, the light steps of several people began to move. By the way, if you have talent, they're cute enough to make it as a picture. As if he didn't know what to do. It was Kylus Herring, a servant of the imperial palace, who spoke with his mouth. With dark blonde hair and friendly blue eyes, Kylus was the second son of the Herring family, one of the Lombardy's vassal families. He was a young man who has been joining the imperial palace for 10 years now, but he was already an elite among the elite qualified as a first-class servant. And it was Caitlin Brown, the deputy chief of the imperial palace, who looked at the bed with affectionate eyes as well. However, the two changed their affiliations just an hour ago. It was the second imperial palace, where they were commanded and they were willing to move their enemies. Sorry, I don't know the right translation. I will let them sleep for a while. I also need time to clear up the first floors. Yes, I heard a lot about Galyahan's daughter, but it's my first time seeing him. So is he the second prince? Originally, Kylus, who likes children, couldn't take his eyes off. But how can this be so cute? Both of you. It was a little fuss, but Caitlin agreed with Kylus. The two children lying facing each other on a bed full of sweets and fell asleep without knowing the world. Both Florentia with curly brown hair and Perez with hair that is somewhat blushy but black like the night sky, both had very cute looks that anyone could look at once again. What's more, the cutest thing to dig into the heart of Kylus and Caitlin was that the two children were covered in one black cloak together. I have to cover it up a little bit more properly, in case the children would wake up. Kylus, who tried to wrap the robe back, saw something and shut his mouth again. When Caitlin was curious, she saw Paris' hand holding Florentia's little hand tightly under the cloak. Boo! Already, Kylus closed his eyes so as not to make a loud sound like someone who was badly injured. It was because of the excessive cuteness that suddenly came in, causing an overload. After taking a few deep breaths in that state, Kylus tried to put the cloak back on Florentia's shoulders. Widely, if it weren't for Perez's strong strength holding his arm like that. The second prince, Perez, who had been sleeping a little while ago, had his eyes opened and held firmly on Kylus' wrist. Who is it? Oh, that's me. Kylus lost his words to the hand squeezing his wrist. Isn't that a kid who just turned 11 years old? But what is this power? Instead of embarrassed Kylus, Caitlin said in a calm voice, Good to meet you, His Majesty the Prince. We are the ones who will be with His Majesty the Prince from today. My name is Caitlin Brown. Well, this is Kylus Herring, His Majesty the Prince. Kylus barely answered. However, the alertness did not disappear from Perez's face. It was then. Ooh, Florentia slowly awakened and making a small sound. End of chapter 49. Chapter 50. At the same time, Perez released Kylus' arm, which he had grasped so tightly. I slept well. Florentia stretched out as hard as she could and then found the man standing in front of her and asked innocently, Huh? Who? As soon as Florentia opened her eyes, it was the opposite reaction from Perez, who raised its claws and guarded like a wounded cat. Ah! Kylus, who had been holding his suddenly released arm, came to his senses and greeted her. Hello, Miss Florentia Lombardi. I'm Kylus Herring, the attendant of the Second Imperial Prince. Oh, the Second Imperial Palace. The attendant of the Second Imperial Palace. Oh, the Second Imperial Palace. Florentia, who blinked his big eyes for a moment, nodded and said while clapping his hands small. If it's a herring, is it a herring family from the Lombardi Scholarship Foundation? Yes, that's right, lady. And Caitlin is here too. Did you sleep well, young lady? Caitlin greeted politely. Wow, nice people came. It was like she had already known that someone would come. Kylus tilted his head inward and looked at Perez. Where did Perez, that a few moments ago seemed to break Kylus' hand when he was about to touch Florentia, go? He now looking at the figure of Florentia smiling wide. Kylus and Caitlin quietly exchanged eyes. It seems that the two are not usually together. Caitlin approached and arranged the messy hair and clothes for Florentia. Perez looked closely at the Florentia, who was being cared for by them familiarly and asked, Do you know who they are? Yeah, I saw Caitlin when I came to the mansion before. Kylus, I've seen him for the first time, but he was from a family that's very close to my family. At Florentia's words, Kylus laughed proudly. It was because Herring, Lombardi's vassal, seemed to be receiving recognition. You both will be tired, but now you have to move. We are moving? Perez hardened his face. Kylus missed it. Although this place is at the same level as a ruined house, it was a place where the second prince was born, raised, and had memories with his mother. Kylus was hesitant to explain this, but Florentia said while holding Perez's hand, A new palace must be given to you. I don't need it, Perez said fairly firmly. No, you need it. What you need the most right now is the palace. However, Florentia's words were even more decisive. Why? Because this is too close to the Empress Palace. At Florentia's straightforward words, Kylus was amazed and coughed. Caitlin looked around to see if the door was closed. You know what I mean? Kylus sweeps his chest down. If Perez never wants to go and insists on not moving to the new palace, things get very complicated. In any case, giving down a new palace was a great gift from His Majesty the Emperor, and rejecting it could be seen as rejecting orders no matter how small children. Perez still a child, so it was okay to force him to move, but he's still a prince anyway, and Kylus didn't want to start messing his first meeting with his master. Besides, Perez is too strong. Seeing the wrist that was caught by Perez a while ago was still sore, it seemed like it was bruising. However, Kylus, who was born as an innately capable servant, laughed while touching his sore wrist. A good prince too. Even basic food, clothing, and shelter have not been provided and has already lived alone for several months. Nevertheless, Perez had many unique corners at a glance. For example, the extraordinary beauty, the power you cannot think of as a child, and the charismatic gaze that was staring at Kylus a little while ago. Thinking that the person he will be serving in the future is good in many ways, Kylus spontaneously tightened his shoulders and raised his mouth. Then he stepped forward and said, The palace that His Majesty gave to the second prince is Matriarch Palace, located on the east side of the Imperial Palace. It is about the size of the palace that Your Majesty Emperor used when His Majesty was a prince. In addition to the building itself, it is even bigger if you consider the gardens included in the Poirac Palace, the maids, and the attendants. It is the same size as the palace of Astana, the first prince. I like that, Florentia exclaimed with great satisfaction. That again, no, Astana will have a little stomachache. Because she is Lombardi's direct line, she is not hesitating in words and actions. But there is no one here to condemn it. Rather, just Lombardi's people, Caitlin and Kylos quarreled. Come on, Perez, Florentia said when she stepped out of bed to see your new house. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Wow, standing in front of us was Poirac Palace, ready to meet the new owner. I admired it without knowing it. It's really big. Poirac Palace was a much larger palace than I thought. I liked it when even more because it was a location where I had to take a long carriage ride from the separate palace where Paris lived and go completely to the other side of the imperial palace. Did you like it? I, who have a small palace compared to this, was envied, and my stomach aches at the moment. I don't know this refers to Paris who envies Tia or Tia who envies Paris. When you read the next paragraph, it's Tia comparing her house, but in fact, Florentia has no reason to be envious. I decided it refers to Tia's. Sorry for the mistakes. Translator's notes. The Lombardi mansion is also large, but the house where my father and I are staying is on a small level with a few rooms. And when I looked back at him, Paris couldn't take his eyes off the Poirac Palace and the busy servants. Yes, I did a good job. In fact, if you are a prince, you have to be treated like this from the beginning and grow up. It's ridiculous that Perez had suffered alone while being stuck in that separate palace. Probably in the afternoon, everything will be ready, said Caitlin. It's fast. It's because the Lord moved it directly. After all, my grandfather was awesome. I hesitated a lot to ask my grandfather to do Paris' work, but again, my choice was right. Caitlin had nothing to say, and Kylus seemed to be a good person. This way, Paris won't have to eat poison and have a miserable childhood. And if you live surrounded by good Lombardi people since childhood, Perez will surely have the impression of a Lombardi servant. That was my plan, to make a good relationship between Perez and Lombardi, who will later become princes. That's why he will give me strength when I later try to become a matriarch. Now, don't hesitate and live here. There was a lot of work, but what I did was simple. It only created an environment in which Perez could live comfortably while enjoying the things like the prince. Why do you say that? What? Why are you talking like it's over? The complexion of the guy who looked at Poirac Palace as if he had been possessed a while ago became dark. I felt like I was looking at the sky covered with dark clouds that would rain right now. Oh no, it's not like that. It's too big. What is so big about it? So take responsibility. Perez's finger gripped the tip of my sleeve. You have to come often. Often? I'm busy. But the look of the guy who sees me who doesn't give a definite answer is fierce. Was he the kid? How can he know how to make this kind of expression? Then I suddenly thought of the future of Perez and convinced him. Once, I will write letters often. Okay. The shabby guy's shoulders drooped again. It was them. Kuryu. A very loud sound came from Perez, who pretends not to hear. I guess he hasn't eaten properly in a few days. I spoke to Kylus on behalf of Perez. We are hungry. Please give us food. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Chenggong. The teacup that Empress holding was broken with a loud noise. What did you say now? Even today, the maid who spoke to the Empress became more white and tired when she looked at the teacups on the floor. However, no matter how afraid, she knew that if she didn't answer, she would be punished even more. So she struggled to squeeze her voice. True, His Majesty gave the second prince. His Majesty Emperor gives Poirac Palace to the second prince. Her Majesty Empress. Where is His Majesty now? Eating at the patronage of the Imperial Palace. Beep. The Empress, who was being dressed literally, got up in a hurry from where he was sitting. Bring a dress, right now. The dress skirts of the maids fluttered along the corridor, following the Empress' quick steps. After attaining the patronage of the Imperial Palace, Empress raised her voice and began to call the Emperor. Your Majesty, where are you? At that time, instead of answering, there was the loud laughter of the Emperor and another person. Haha, that's a smart kid. It was the Emperor who burst into laughter while tapping on the table of patronage. Rabini said, turning around the corner with a glamorous smile, Your Majesty, you were here. But the next moment her smile disappeared like it was washed with water. Oh, Empress, welcome. Lombardi's lord has just visited, so let's have a cup of tea as well. Rabini realized, suddenly, the reason why the Emperor was interested in the second prince, and the reason why he gives the Poirac Palace. Everything was done by an old Lombardi man. It's been a long time, Empress. Lulak Lombardi greeted her while standing up from his seat. Lulak, who couldn't stand the anger and watched her trembling, said to the Emperor, I think I have to go, Your Majesty. No, why are you leaving now? There's something I need to take care of at Poirac Palace on the way out. Oh, is that right? Then I will see you off to the carriage. While the two had a conversation like a close relative whom they had met after a long time, Rabini trembled with a sense of alienation, like he had become a complete outsider. The feeling culminated when Lulak's eyes passed her. Lulak left and the Emperor followed him. That means she couldn't stand there stupidly. The Empress forcefully smiled and followed the Emperor's back to see Lulak off. when it is time to pass through the corridor in front of the main door where the Lombardi carriage is waiting. A man was standing. It was Lulak's son, Vice Lombardi. He stayed at the Emperor's palace last night. When he heard the news, he was startled and jumped. Dum dum. Lulak Lombardi, who took the lead, gradually became closer to Vice. Oh, father! Vice, who was contemplated like a child caught in stealing, was hardened with no courtesy to the Emperor, and Lulak Lombardi passed by without even paying attention to him. He made his first son look like a non-existent person. Huh. Vice groaned like he was having a nightmare and could not even think of following Lulak. He stood as if he had been nailed to the spot. Well, see you sooner or later. Now, show your face often, Lord. Lulak and the Emperor greeted each other as if no one else. So Lombardi's courage leaves. Rabini, who kept biting her lips and suppressing her anxiety, approached the Emperor and opened her mouth. Sire, she was amazed. She was amazed. What do you do, Empress? He is looking at her and smiling. It's a smile that's not so different from before, but the Emperor's eyes changed. Her hand, realizing it instinctively, fell weakly. I have to go to see Iman's office. The Empress will also return to rest. There was no mention of the second prince. Now, she was sentenced to have no authority over the second prince. The Emperor returns to the office, and Rabini has been unable to move in place for a while, as Viz did. End of chapter 50.